better be. They're big contributors to Ain't That Swell. They keep our engines turning. More content, more programs, and just support the crew who support the potty, mate. It's that simple. Keeps us going mad.
All right. You know what I love about whatever sort of cool Australian cabin you're in is that there's a surfboard, a skull, and a Henry Rollins poster. Now, I don't know, man. If that's not cool, I don't know what is. You know.
Well observed, my friend. Yeah, well, and there's deep connections there to all three objects. The surfboard is a Morning of the Earth twin fin made by Simon Jones, the guy who I credit with getting me into surfing. One of my mum's dear friends, and I call him uncle because that's essentially what he is to me. And yeah, that's basically the best twin fin ever made. I'm calling it's a swallowtail twin with a couple little flyers on it. I think loosely based on a prototype written by Barton Lynch, a Greg Clough. How do you say Clough? Is it?
Yeah, it's Clough. Yeah,
Clough. Yeah, Greg Clough.
Aloha.
Aloha, yeah. That's right. Yeah. And Simon's from Manly and grew up with BL. So, yeah, that's kind of he reckons BL was doing the best surfing of his career on that same similar kind of surfboard. And then the Henry Rollins poster. Yeah, Mum took me to see Henry Rollins at the Enmore when I was 21 on that tour.
That's fantastic. Mom brought you to Black Flag, you know.
Yeah. Exactly. He'd kind of hung up the Black Flag deal by that point and was just doing his spoken word tours. But fuck, man.
Yeah.
The guy spent 3 hours talking without a break, and you were pretty well riveted the whole time.
Sure.
And the Enmore in Sydney is like this dilapidated family-owned theater. It's iconic. It's in Newtown. This old Greek family owns it. It's like walking into fucking, I don't know, like.
No, I've been to the Enmore. It's like walking into the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there.
That's epic. You've been there. No way. What were you doing there?
Well, I used to live in Sydney, as you know. I used to live up above in Earl's Court, up above the ferry, the Manly Ferry.
I didn't know you lived in Sydney, mate. You've done everything. You've lived one of the most extensive and incredible lives of any person I know. It's outrageous.
Wow, that's a real compliment coming from you. Thank you, Jed.
So what were you doing in Sydney?
I was working for, I was one of the editors of Waves magazine. And of course, I've been proudly involved in tracks all my life. And, you know, it was my Aussie era. And I was actually living with a beautiful woman who was the Victorian female cricket team captain. And she was a very dangerous spinner. And I was, we were living together there, and I used to take the Manly ferry to work. Okay, honey. And she'd fix me like a little sanger, and I'd go down, and as the ferry pulled out, I'd wave to her, you know, and she'd wave to me from the balcony of Earl's Court, you know, and it was a great love affair.
Are you kidding me? You were living with a Victorian female leg spinner. Are you serious? That is too iconic. Who's making you sangers on your way? Who's making you sangers on your way across Sydney Harbour on a ferry?
Like all Australian women, she was remarkable. I'm telling you.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, man, and I mean,
and then I'd show up in Darlinghurst, like next to King's Cross there, and walk into the editorial team, and we'd go, well, what kind of mischief are we going to get into today? You know, and that was journalism, man. You know,
it's a super interesting period of Waves and Tracks' history. I had Steve Cooney on the show a while back, and he was talking about, I guess, a period that predates that slightly, but working for Tracks when Tracks was basically Rolling Stone in ways. And, you know, Hunter S, like, it was one of the leading, if not the leading countercultural mags in the world.
Sure.
And you had like the likes of Hunter S. Thompson coming through the offices, and, you know, Steve ended up being his chaperone in Sydney, and, you know, they ended up having a long friendship after that. But yeah, it was.
Well, I remember working for them when it was a newspaper, of course, and it was in newsprint, and they'd have covers of like Nat Young as Jesus Christ, or a outfall of pollution. And this would be the cover of the surf magazine, you know. And it was really something. And I think that it really influenced my work at Surfer Magazine, and certainly this book that's just been published. But we'll get back to that later. But with the tracks thing, the journalism that Americans loved about Australian surf journalism was their courage. Like, they were on it, man. It was like you were in a pub and you could talk and you could say things and you could make a difference. And it ended up with us Americans, becoming Aussiophiles. Like, we just worshiped the Australian surf scene because, I don't know, it was so honest. And in many ways, it allowed us to have our Vietnam, because we would go on all the poo marches and we'd go on all the different ocean outfall marches. And, we felt like we were making a difference in the ocean. And of course, the offshore drilling and all this. And man, we were there, man. Americans showed up and we're like, we're going to live here forever. It was a spectacular place for us.
Yeah, I love that, man. It's an interesting observation just about the differences, the subtle nuances in surf culture from here to America. And it's something I think about a lot. I've noticed there's a very big difference in America between, say, the West Coast and Florida. There's a perceptible difference in the nature and culture of surfers that come out of those two locations. It seems to me, at least.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely correct. That's why all the world champions come from the East Coast. They're desperate. These are desperados. They're like, it's the Wild West back there, and there's not enough resources. So every single wave that appears is ridden to its absolute maximum. There's no sitting at Duramba and watching a nice offshore afternoon. Those guys are out there on that, and the other thing that was, I think, the one thing that we really related to as Northern Californian surfers, my brother Sam and I, was the physical geographical beauty of Australia. That matched our philosophy, because we were San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Big Sur, Central Coast, And so when we got to like Bells, when we finally got to the God Almighty Holy Bells, when we finally got there, and I include the Torquay pub in that, by the way, when we
Morris Cole's victims' blood splatters on the ground.
Oh yeah, of course. I actually saw Morris Cole knock out a pit bull dog once. No, listen to this story. Okay, it's the Torquay pub. No, we're next door at I think White Shark surfboards, and this pit bull was loose on the streets of Torquay, terrorizing the place, and it scared this little girl. And Morris saw this out of the corner of his eye, and he got down on his hands and knees, and he crawled up to that dog and said, "Mate," and swung this massive right fist and knocked the dog out. That's a true story.
Man, that's crazy. This
is the kind of stuff that we loved, and as Americans, we're like, "Oh, these Aussies, mate,"
Yeah.
But it was the geographical beauty, particularly when we arrived in Victoria. Just that beautiful, the beautiful waves, the big offshore winds, and Gibson Steps and the surf coast, and you get to put on a wetsuit, and it really, really suited us, Victoria.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess Australia, culturally, we're pretty different, like in terms of, it's always been the workers' paradise, or this kind of like fairly blue collar utopia. And, we never had any great conquests as a nation. In fact, we were just pretty much playing defense militarily. And the only like thing of note that happened to us in the theater of war was an insane slaughter in Gallipoli, where a bunch of aristocrats fucking sent us to our death. So there's a very deep skepticism of power, of authority, of the rich and the aristocrats. And it's a country where it's considered shameful to be flashy and showy with wealth and success, where the rich really get no respect here.
I'll tell you what does get respect, Jack, and something that really impressed us Americans, particularly me, all my life, was the fair go. The Australian fairness and the togetherness of that, like that, the brotherhood. I once did that article for Tracks called Pubdom, and it was all about the kingdom of the pub of Australia, where that's where people gather and all bets are off, all pretenses are off. And it's also this fair go thing. Like if someone's having a dig, that's enough. That fair go, man, you know, and the fairness in the sports, which was worshipped. And I think that it's one of the national treasures of Australia. And I think it still exists because we see the floods and we see the fires, and there's some lady in a bra out there, you know, with her garden hose protecting her friend's house, you know, and there's just, to us with Australians, there's a real togetherness that we just don't get in the United States.
Yeah, that's well put, man. And that fair go, I mean, it should be written on the emblem on the national flags, you know, fair go, cunt, like something like
I agree.
that.
I agree 100%, you know. It's like, always been that way.
Yeah, and we, I guess, cling on to that and celebrate that, whether it's a myth or not. I mean, we've become increasingly influenced by American culture and capitalism and these things, but that is still the mantra of pretty much every leader who ever takes control of this country. They know that those two simple words resonate so hard, and no one's willing to step away from it, even if their policies are the complete opposite of that. But
well, I'm glad you brought up the Australian leaders, because I was in the Woolloomooloo pub once waiting for a boxing match, and Bob Hawke, the Prime Minister Bob Hawke, walks in with his bricklayer mate, and they step up to the bar, and I was looking left and right going, do you know who that is? Is anyone, you know? And everyone's like, take it easy, man, he's just having a beer with his mate. And it was the religion of the pub, that whoever you are, you walk in there with a mate and you're not hassled, man. You know, if that would have been Obama in America, you know, they would have called in a B-17 strike or something. You know what I mean? It's like, that really impressed me, that pardon me, I'm just getting over a flu, that nobody even bothered to bother Bob Hawke in a pub. I thought that really impressed me, you know?
Yeah, I think that's another thing Australians pride themselves on, is not buying into celebrity culture and celebrity worship. Like and I think that's why a lot of famous people enjoy spending time down here, because again, it's written into that culture where, like, same with a fair go, same with like that kind of skepticism of power and authority and wealth. There's just this thing where it's like considered shameful to go and fucking sweat some cunt because he's a somebody. But you know, these things, I guess, are also being somewhat lost from the culture with social media and selfies and all that horse shit. But yeah, traditionally it's been a place where you respect people's boundaries, and you don't, you know, you strive to treat everyone the same. And that's like a trippy, like, Buddhist principle of equanimity that's somehow shared in the working class and the blue collar culture as well. But it's a nice concept. I hope it survives.
Fair go is very, not even basically, it's very simply the golden rule: treat others as you'd have them treat you. And, you know, the Australians live by that. And, you know, that's the thing about one of the things I'm really proud about in this new book is the fact that there's a lot of Australian stories in here, because that was Australia has always so deeply impressed me. And as you know, I've lived there, and I was competing there as a professional surfer. Then I became a journalist. And then I wrote for all the great magazines. And of course, I was the American voice of Triple J, you know, for the Bells Beach contest for almost, 15 years.
No way. What haven't you done? It's insane. Are you serious?
And just the other day, just here, I was hanging out with Claw Warbrick. Okay. Claw was here, and we were dusting off some old memories. And what a classic, man. What a visionary. I mean,
Rip Curl founder for the uninitiated.
Yes, Rip Curl founder and visionary. What would we have done without Claw, you know, with all his eccentricities and his points of view, you know? But yeah, I have found that even with all the visitors that come to Bali here, where I am now, that the Australian visitors still, to me, still reflect that fair go. And also there'll be a lot of surf stars here. You know, Mick Fanning was here, and a lot of the Conor O'Leary, all these guys were here. And the Australian surfers would react very differently in public to these guys than the Americans, or even you know, the fangirls or something, you know. And so I don't know. I haven't been to Australia in quite some time, but it would be a real shame to lose that deep philosophy that you guys have as a nation.
Yeah, man, it's a trip out. Like in my dealings in the surf media and industry, you know, meeting certain California surfers spring to mind where, you know, you could tell they were from wealth and they were successful, but they'd grown up in a culture where they'd been worshipped.
Oh,
And
yes.
it was awkward, man. Like I didn't know
Sure.
how to interact with someone who had grown up believing their own hype. And in Australia, you can't. It's not possible. Like you can't. You just can't grow up that way. Our culture does not allow you to believe your own hype. The moment someone cops a whiff of you believing your own hype, you get it punched or knocked out of you, like either metaphorically or literally. So
I've seen it. And I'll tell you something else that really adds to this, that sometimes goes over the head of Australians, the remarkable charm of your guys' nicknames. Okay. We don't have nicknames in the United States. Not even our sports heroes. Tiger Woods, he doesn't have a nickname. Nobody has a nickname. Okay. But the Australians with these nicknames that level the playing field, that just level friendships on the same, no matter where you are in any kind of social strata, that nickname brings everyone together. And I always wanted the Australians to give me a nickname. They never did, but I always wanted one, because it was such a badge of honor, the MR and the Kong and all these great, and even the working class, like Robbo and Jono and all this. It just brings the Australian people together, and particularly because I've always believed that the surfing culture of Australia has been the weather vane and the tip of the spear of Australian culture, because most of you live on the coast, you swim before you walk. The ocean is a very, very important part of your life, a very integral part of your life, and we're the ones, surfers are the ones out there playing in it. And I've just always believed that the Australian surfing culture, unlike America, was vital to the Australian identity. I think you've been real lucky that way.
So lucky, man. I mean, it's a massive island at the end of the day. And yeah, pretty well everyone does live on the coast. And yeah, I mean, obviously we're making sweeping generalizations, but that's what we do as writers sometimes.
And that's what surfers do. Like, the thing that really bugs me, Jed, lately in this journalism is these sissies, that write like maybe, perhaps, arguably the biggest swell in the last 3 months. I'm like, shut up, man. That's the biggest swell in the last decade. Just say it, but it's arguably, Kelly Slater, arguably the most successful competitive. What are you smoking, man? So I believe that surf journalists should continue to make bold calls.
Totally, man. I remember Derek Riley, my first editor at Stab, made the point, or it might have been Fred Paul, but one of them was like, there is no such word, you should never use words like seemingly, arguably, like it either is or it isn't. Like it's your job to say what it is or isn't.
I agree 100%. And, Derek influenced my writing as well. He's still a dear friend. And that he almost wrote brutally, and it really influenced me, I would say. Derek influenced my writing, definitely. And to this day.
Mate, I want to get into your book shortly because it's a fucking ripper. Like it's so good.
Man.
I mean, you've lived this insane life. You've met all of the greats. Like you've not only met them, but you've spent intimate moments with them. Slater, Curran, Cheyne Horan. I was reading that epic Goonengerry profile.
It's a wild time.
Oh, it's wild. Before we get into all that,
sure,
I'd like to go back just to your early years, man, and you find out a bit more about that. You mentioned growing up in Northern California. I understand your dad was in the Navy. Yep. And like, I mean, there's two things running in parallel there. I guess you were itinerant, but at the same time, I guess you found your feet in surfing in Northern California. So talk to us about, finding your feet in surfing in that part of the world. Sure. It's famously localized in parts. There's a lot of commercial dope growers, and there's a healthy outlaw / hippie counterculture vein running through the whole joint. What was it like growing up there?
Well, I think it's important to first mention that, yeah, we were a Navy family, and I was born in Maine, which is the far northeast. But of course, we left there when I was an infant, and we crossed we crossed the Atlantic by Navy transport, and my first schooling was in Nice, France, and so by the time by the time it was 1967, my father was stationed at Pearl Harbor, and he was a very rare thing at that time in 1967. He was a single father with 3 kids, myself, my older brother, and my older sister. And there was no such thing as daycare. So what he would do is he'd bring a slab of Primo beer down to the Beach Boys at Waikiki and just go, look, keep an eye on these kids. They're really good swimmers. And so my brother Sam and I were taught how to surf by the great Beach Boys, Rabbit Kakai, Leroy Achoy. And my brother Sam and I were both pushed into the same wave at the same instant. So we've been surfing exactly the same period of time. My father was a Navy pilot that had become a Navy dentist, and after World War II. And so our formative years were in Hawaii. And because of that Beach Boy early days and surfing with the Beach Boys and with a young Michael Ho and all this, my brother and I have always had a great relationship with Hawaii. We've never had a problem on the North Shore. We've always had omerta. We were connected to the Kealanas, so we never had to put up with any of the acrimony of the whole North Shore scene. So then my father was then stationed in the San Francisco Bay in an island called Alameda. And that's what launched my real formative years of surfing, that Northern California thing that you have. I've had the Aloha experience as a kid, and now I'm in Northern California. And what I learned mostly about what you're talking about here is that the geography, I mentioned it earlier, the geography of the land was as important to me as the nature of the waves. And we learned this from being around this incredible, sensational beauty of Northern California and Big Sur and the Central Coast. When we went past the Mason-Dixon line, we called it, when we went down to like Los Angeles or San Diego or Huntington Beach, we were confused to the point of almost being dizzy, because we'd look to shore as we were riding these waves and we're like, what is this just mass urban cement jungle? Like, we didn't get it. We're used to looking in at these great cliffs and these great rivers and all the migration of the whales going past us, and we were used to a very natural environment. And I spent a lot of time in my Northern California years while I was surfing looking towards shore. I really did. I just thought, wow, because to me, what I was surfing, the land doesn't stop at the water's edge. It just goes underwater. And I felt like I was still surfing the land, that these waves were forming over. And it was a very different mindset. So we had a very deep love for environment and connection to the beauty of it. And as I mentioned earlier, that's why we loved Australia so much, because you have so much beautiful coastline.
It's fascinating, man. While you're talking, I was just kind of comparing in my head your life to the other great senior surf scribe, William Finnegan, who wrote Barbarian Days. And, you're kind of like the blue collar battler, son of a single dad version of William Finnegan. You both began your surf journeys in very similar circumstances in Hawaii.
Almost identical.
Man,
yeah.
And reading your book, I was like, it's a great book because, as a journalist, you've shelved your ego and you've made it about everyone else.
Yes.
And I do look forward to the sequel, man. There is a memoir. I know that you
somewhere in there.
Yeah, you say in the foreword, the forewords by Kelly Slater, which is amazing. I'll get into that in a sec. But
sure.
In your kind of prologue or
Preface.
whatever, you talk about the fact that it isn't a memoir, and you kind of make that point because you I guess proud of that or whatever. But yeah, just listening to your story now, man, it is remarkable. Like those beginnings, man, like fuck that's crazy. And to think that your dad was a single dad, like, so he fought in World War II.
He thank heavens he just missed the show. They dropped the bomb right when he was headed off to fight in the Pacific Theater. He was flying a what was it, an F-6F Hellcat aircraft, a single seat fighter. And I'm glad he didn't go, because that meant I got to surf one day, so
Totally. Yeah.
But
And
what's interesting about what you mentioned about this book, I think that one of the things that I find that I'm so proud of is that it's a collection of stories that happened over 35 years. And so the book itself is a happening. It's not, you don't read it from cover to cover. It's like a great bathroom book. You can just thumb through it and pick the story you want of these stories that have been published, and these stories that have been, part of the surfing lexicon. And it's not just a bunch of stories about a bunch of old guys. I mean, it's got everyone from, Kelly Slater to John Florence, or it's a series of stories rather than it's a series of stories that you can digest in short periods of time. So in many ways, it's still I think it would still be interesting to today's social media obsessed youth. I think this is a book that's very easy to manage in this modern world, because you don't read it cover to cover. You basically bring it along on a surf trip as a piece of equipment and inspiration. I believe that the stories in this book can actually make you surf better, because you realize what a great, eccentric, wild tribe we belong to. What a bunch of characters are we, And I think that's what's so inspiring about this book.
yeah, it's amazing. Like, if you ever wanted to know about a surfing legend, living or dead, the chances are they're in this book. Everyone from Occy and Curran and Slater and Horan to Al Byrne, the late great Al Byrne, to Keala Kennelly. I mean, the opening story,
Oscar Wright, Ozzy's in
Wright.
there.
Yeah. The opening story about Bethany Hamilton is just like, it's as gripping and hard to read at the same time as anything I've read. Like, it's so rattling. Far out, man.
What it takes is what I call my 5-day rule, where when I got these assignments to go do these things, I let the subject know, I'm not going to do this unless I spend 5 days with you. And I mean with you. The Rob Machado story, I slept at the foot of his bed on a couch. I lived with Cheyne Horan in his compound, his compound. I lived with the Bethany Hamilton family. We became friends, 25 days after she'd lost her arm. And it was influenced by, of all things, that early journalism that you mentioned about Rolling Stone and Tracks and all that, because Rolling Stone, used to be backstage, man. And that magazine definitely influenced me, because the profiles on, I don't know, Led Zeppelin or whatever, it was always from the backstage point of view. And nowadays, when you read these celebrity profiles in some of these magazines, you realize that the journalist got 15 minutes with a tape recorder in a cafe, while 6 more journalists from 6 other magazines are waiting in queue, and you get nothing. So I insisted that I wasn't going to do this unless these people had the courage to let me come live with them. And that's what made the difference. That's where you learn Lane Beachley's real name. And that's where you learn that Mark Ockloop had a difficult relationship with his father. And that's where you learn these things that we can relate to, that is relatable. Wow, like these guys have, Kelly Slater came from nothing, sleeping on the floor underneath a moving blanket. Yes, and I think a lot of us can relate to this. And that's why I was so passionate about telling these stories from having lived with these people. I think that otherwise it's just too much of a surface. For example, right now, everybody's Bethany Hamilton on social media. You wake up, you hop in your ice bath, you have your croissant. Here's my great breakfast. It's my wife's birthday. Here's my happy, smiling family. And I know for a fact they're all getting in fistfights. And so it's like, what is this? Where is the relatability? The reason that we deserve to have profiles that like the ones you'll find in this book, In Deep, is because these people influence us, Jet. We wear the clothes that they're shilling, that the companies are pushing on us. We want to be like them. We want to surf like them. We get boards like them. We want to be them. And we deserve to know who the hell they are.
Well said. And, you know, you talk about spending 5 days with people. And yeah, incredible to read the story on Slater that basically announced him to the world, that 1989 piece for Surfer magazine. And as you mentioned, like it's something that's been totally lost in the narrative about Slater. And I can only put that down to maybe it's the American media's lack of interest in that kind of underdog story. Like, I feel like if he was Australian, his hard scrabble beginnings would have been much more celebrated, maybe, because it's weird that, like, we'll get into the nitty gritty of how tough he was doing it, but that's just completely lost in the narrative of Kelly's life. And for that reason, he's really struggled to get respect in certain sections of the Australian surfing community in particular. Like, a lot of his peers from his time on tour, yeah, you know, they don't have necessarily the best things to say about him. It was almost as though like he was considered an elite. Someone who had
that is so interesting. And I agree with you 100%. You've made such a good point. America is about winning. They don't really want to hear about anyone until they win. Okay. That's not true in Australia. You know, they want to know what kind of Aussie battler or what kind of struggle this person has had. And it goes back to the fair go. It goes back to the tall poppy syndrome. It goes back to the Australian philosophy of we are human beings, you know. And Kelly, when he burst onto the scene, oh, he had it so easy. Are you out of your mind? He had a difficult youth with a absentee father and a mother that held 4 jobs, and you know, sleeping on the floor and going to high school. And like, this guy, he fought his way out of that. Now, sure, he was recognized as the Messiah at 17, 18, 19 years old, but guess what? So was Mick Fanning. All right. Mick Fanning won bells at 16 years old. So yes, Kelly became a winner by the time he was 19, and certainly a world champion at 20. But those early days of his on the East Coast with crappy surf and living in a difficult town that was, you know, and having, you know, problems with the family and a overworked, wonderful mother. And, you know, this is such an important part of his story. And I think it's why we've always remained friends. I think it's also why he wanted to do the foreword for this book. When he heard about that I was making it, he just called me up and said, hey, I got to be part of this. And I said, boy, do you ever? Because, you know, there's some Kelly stories in here, man. And he's been taken out of context so much because of his, you know, Ulysses type profile. But this is a very, very understandable human being that just happened to have a remarkable skill at the right time. And I'm really glad that you pointed that point out, because
yeah,
America sold him to the world as a born winner.
Yeah, as this Disney kind of Tony Hawk replica,
exactly.
Like this guy who's like the super marketable pretty boy, like success story. When in reality, he's one of 3 to a single mom sleeping like, paint the scene for us in his house. It's, you know, he was sleeping on mattresses on the floor, surrounded by boxes of his surf trophies. Like, dad's an absent Alco. You know, him and Fanning's story, when I think about it, it's pretty much the same story. And
it's very similar, mate. That's why I mentioned
moms,
Mick.
like, I think Mick was one of 4, again, absent father. And we actually talk a lot about this in pro surfing, that there is this almost like single mother syndrome. Medina, single mom, John, single mom, Fanning, single mom, Slater, single mom, like all the goats that are basically coming from these really hard scrabble existences where all they had in life was the waves and their ability to surf those. And that was a place where they could find some level of self-esteem and satisfaction purely from just tearing the bag out of it. They would get love. They would get, you know, people you know, they would feel good about themselves. It was probably the only place they could feel good about themselves.
Yes, and thank heavens they were blessed with this remarkable ability. Now, it also directly relates to what they do on the face of a wave and what they look like. For example, Rob Machado, who I would like to mention, he recently lost his father, and I wish him the best. He's going through a time now because they were very close. But the reason Rob Machado surfs so beautifully, and that to me is the best description of Rob Machado's surfing, is beautiful, is because he came from a simple family, but it was a loving household. It was a tight, loving household. Yeah, they had a little house in Oceanside up on the hill, but the father was supportive and they just thought he was great. And the mother was there baking cookies. And, this family, which is why the latest tragedy of losing his father has been taken so devastatingly, is because, yes, Rob also came from a very simple background, but it was together, man. It wasn't acrimony. It wasn't crazy. And look at the way he surfs. He surfs gracefully and beautifully, the way that a secure human being raised in a secure family would. He would not surf desperately the way that Kelly does, or Mick Fanning, or these young people, the Dingo Morrisons, and these fantastic surfers that have had to surf or die.
Yeah, that's a great point, mate. Like Machado, he surfs with grace and love and flow, and like
Exactly.
he's in the sweet spot of life and that translates into his surfing. And then you look at his competitive career, and yeah, he never really reached the heights he should have. And when he had the chance, he got duped by Slater with this like suspect high five in a Pipe Masters semi-final or whatever it was. And that was like such a classic metaphor between a guy who's hungry and a guy who's not. And I mean, and that Slater, I guess that's one of the reasons Slater lost a little bit of respect in Australia. It was just some of his tactics were questionable over the years, and there was some guys here had issues with that. But mate, to be honest, like in the theater of sport and competition, I come from a background where I grew up playing a lot of different combat sports, or mostly football, and fuck, people are doing pretty bad shit to each other to get the win. So like, I think once the whistle goes, it's pretty much all fair game, short of permanently or seriously injuring someone. Yeah,
sure. Well, I'd like to weigh in on that because I've spent a lot of time with Kelly and I've spent a lot of time with Rob. I think that the reportage on that moment, that high five, is one of the great crimes in the history of surfing, because it's not true. This was a natural moment between two surfers having the time of their lives. And I've talked to them both, and I've looked them straight in the eye, and I've asked them straight up. And they were out there in that perfect surf, two good friends out in that perfect surf, surfing in a semifinal, and they were mates. And it was so easy because the surf was pumping, it was offshore, it was beautiful, everything was great, and the whole thing. Both of them were surfing well. It was one of the first times Rob had ever had any room at Pipeline. Rob, if you look back for photos and films, you don't see him at Pipeline a lot because he hated crowds and he couldn't take that pressure play. Kelly, of course, would gird for battle and go out there with his claymore and start chopping heads off, But that high five moment was misreported. And I'm not just saying this because it was between two Americans. That was a mate moment between those two surfers that got blown into something completely else. And that's my call.
Yeah, it was a perfect mate moment that led to Kelly getting priority and not Rob.
Well, yeah, sure it was. And of course, and it's the way that we talked about Rob's beauty. He wasn't looking for that.
Yeah.
But mind you, he was number 2 in the world. I would say that that's an incredible competitive achievement. I mean, number 2, that's not bad, Jed.
It's just an interesting character study, isn't it? Because if Kelly's in Rob's position, he's probably more fixated on getting priority than slapping his bro down in that moment. Or if he slaps him down, he's still conscious of what he needs to get priority and maintain his stranglehold on that heat. Don't you reckon?
I agree. I agree 100% with you, Jed. I agree with that. Had Kelly been on that wave, he probably wouldn't have thought of the high five. But the fact that Rob did, and Kelly responded in kind, he responded in the moment. I mean, that was Rob's trip, and that was Kelly's trip, but I don't think it was
Exactly.
Kelly Slater as Snidely Whiplash, sharpening his handlebar mustache, going, ha, 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 I know what to do now. that it was depicted that way, I think, is one of the great crimes. However, I am a storyteller, and I do believe in mythology, and I believe in surfing's mythology, and by God, I've created a lot of it, and I'm all for it. So I'm not trying to take that moment away from anybody. I'm just telling you what I believe it was.
Yeah, and it was a magic moment. It's more memorable than world titles, like far out. Like there's heaps of people who've won world titles who I can't remember, but I remember that moment. And interestingly, we had Kelly and Oki on the show once in Torquay at the Torquay Bolo, and Oki actually hit him with that conspiracy theory, and Kelly didn't take it too well. He wasn't pleased, and fired back and essentially said what you said. And
it's always bothered him. It's always bothered Kelly.
I bet, mate. Where, like, there's just so many good stories in this book. I was tripping on the one about Cecil Carrel, and this this remote island. I believe it was home to this, like, one of the last islands to fall in World War II, and there was an old man living on this island, and there was I think it was the same island where the last Japanese soldier lived before he gave himself up in like 1974, and some bizarre like island of there was not only a Japanese soldier living there until 1974, believing that America was still at war with Japan, but there was an African American soldier living on the same island, fleeing the war, who just decided,
isn't it amazing?
Like, mate, it's a crazy story, unbelievable.
It's an island called Morotai, and
that's right.
It's northeastern northeastern Indonesia. You don't hear a lot about it. And me and Jason Childs, the great Australian photographer, the great Jason Childs, he invited me to go there because he'd seen something very special. And those were these little kids that were carving their surfboards out of the jungle, okay, with their parents' axes and knives, okay. And he wanted to go back and do a story on this. And I thought, man, I'm in on that one. Okay, so we get to Morotai. And that second night, when Cecil, the old man, with the rheumy eyes and the rattling voice, started to tell this tale about that African-American Marine who went AWOL and stayed behind, and married and had children in this village. And I was sitting with the descendants of these things. And he was the guy that taught the village how to surf in World War II. That's 1944, something, 40, whatever. And here he was, and he taught these people how to surf. And here are these little kids so stoked on surfing that they're carving their wooden surfboards out. And this is the kind of story that only surfers come across, because we travel with purpose. We travel to find liquid gold out there. We don't just show up to have an umbrella drink on the beach and relax. And, we don't do that. We're there seeking something that we desire. And that takes getting into the culture, or you will not find those waves. So we find ourselves sitting in these huts, and we find ourselves sitting with these people telling these incredible stories that somehow, Jed, I don't know how, always come back to surfing somehow, and I'm just so proud to have been part of that legacy. And I can only encourage any young people that are listening to us right now, get out there, man, get out there, because it is noble to go seek these waves. And I'm sure you would agree with me, Jed, the greatest surfing explorers have all been Australian.
Yeah. Peter Troy, Martin Daly, but Mike Boyum, he was an American. I mean, he's right up the top there too. But I'm so glad you what you really did there is just put your finger on something that is been the most influential thing in my life, and that is surf travel. And you made such a good point there. Like, travel generally is little more than an exercise in seeing some touristic sites, right? Because when you go to a country, what else is there? You don't speak the language. All you know is what is famous about that place, and that's what everyone else knows too. So you end up in these places that are basically the same no matter where you go on Earth. Like whether you go to Angkor Wat or the Taj
Eiffel
Mahal,
Tower, the Eiffel Tower.
you're going to run into the same thing. It's catered towards tourists. Whereas surfers, this is the fucking beauty of it, man. It's like there's even like, so we've got purpose, like you said, to find this liquid gold. And that purpose more broadly is we're engaged in connecting with nature. That's why we travel, is to connect with nature. And I feel like we get a little cosmic tap on the bum from the universe, from Gaia, from whatever it is up there, if there is anything up there. But it's like, yeah, like you guys have the right idea. You're out there, you don't want to hurt anyone, you don't want to take anything. You just want to go play in the water of this place. And as a result, those intentions are so pure that, like, not only do people recognize that in you, but I feel like the planet recognizes it in you. And it becomes this super instrumental kind of change in your life where you just learn and you're exposed to so many different cultures, colors, and creeds that you just develop this like super worldly, compassionate, forgiving take on things. Like, whereas, alternatively, you could just be this person in a fucking racial or political silo, judging the other as being different. But you just can't be that after surfing your whole life. You've experienced compassion and kinship with too many colors and creeds to ever be a narrow-minded bigot.
Yes, in many ways, surfers stopped the Vietnam War. They led protests. Surfers, I'm not going. That's crazy. I've been there. I've surfed Vietnam. I'm not. What are you talking about? So the thing that I also wanted to mention about the cosmic tap on the shoulder, I am a deep, deep believer in that cosmic connection of going back into the ocean, that atavistic return to where we all crawled from. And it gives me the concept that surfing, if you're really into it, is not so much a wave as it is a place. It's a place that we want to be. And that place, like say you go to Nias, you're going there to get back in one of those beautiful barrels at Nias. Like, you're going to go back and you are going to find yourself in that place. But that place is also that culture that you come across in your travels, getting there. And then once being there, you take all that culture and you bring it back into that barrel with you, that place. And so surfing is as much a place as it is an act of play, and it's a remarkable thing to be able to jump off the edge of a continent, to be in that place. And if you can't get some cosmic feelings from that, man, I don't know. You need to be hit across the head with a cricket bat.
Totally. And we have to be careful about how outcome focused we become with extracting those cosmic feelings. Like, you can get it like those kids on Morotai from being on a wooden plank they've made themselves, as much as you can from getting a stand tall at Nias, as long as your attitude is the right one. So like, I feel like the one thing that is devouring surfing is like this kind of freaking wave capitalism where the apex predators are just trying to take more resources than they're entitled to. They're trying to belittle people around them in their goal to secure more of this resource, which they don't even remember because they've stuffed 20 pits in a row. And like, there's just fucking, stepping off jet skis into their 50th tube of the day. Like,
you're not talking about Snapper Rocks, are you now? Come on, that's holy cow.
Yeah, I mean, could be Kira, could be Nias, could be Heaps of places. That kind of mentality is almost the prevailing one at the moment in surfing, where people are just on this hell ride to stuff their face in as many pits as they can. Consequences be damned, spiritual connection be damned, everything else be damned. It's just pure tube gluttony and adrenaline fueled addiction.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with social media and what it's done to us. You know, it has reduced all our feelings and even conversations like you and I are having right now down to an emoji, you know. And you know, there'll be a remarkable surfing incident, like say Nathan Florence's tube ride on that slab in the middle of nowhere, that remarkable wave. Now, I think that deserved some examination and some discussion. And all it gets on social media is an emoji of a little piece of fire, or somebody smiling with their hand over their head, or someone saying sick, you know. And this is now the expression of surfing, when before, even on all our road trips that every surfer has to take, whether it's walking from your house, you know, 2 blocks down to Burley Heads, or whether it's trying to find some wave in the Maldives, right? It's that conversation that we have about this, and the context and the consideration of surfing. Now, surfing in today's surfing media has this patina of goofiness, like it's all something to laugh at. And you know, you watch Stab High and this aerial contest, and they're joking and laughing. You know, the judges are ha ha ha. It's all so ridiculous, and it just drives me absolutely crazy. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, we all have to discuss war and peace, you know, every time we get together, but we need this outlet to be able to express this act that has dominated our lives and that we love as deep as we love our lovers and our parents. You know, we need to be able to talk about this, or it does fall into the silly.
Yeah. We're in a dicey situation now with YouTube and social media, where a lot of surfers, a lot of free surfers, pro surfers rely on that as an income, and their way of generating income is essentially to go to, you know, barely filmed or recently discovered waves and put some catchy headline on there and blow them out for their own financial means. And nothing contravenes surf culture more than that. Like when I was growing up, the whole concept of putting a photo of yourself in a public forum and bragging about some wave you caught, mate, you wouldn't dare. It's social suicide. You'd be fucking laughed out of your board riders club. You just wouldn't be able to go to the pub. You'd be living in I don't know, you'd have to move towns. It just would be a nightmare.
You'd have to move to Dubbo, you know?
You'd have to move. That's where my family's from, pretty much. I would have just been back out at Forbes, fucking working in a butcher. Forget about serving.
5 miles from gun to guy, 5 miles from the dog of the Tucker box, mate. You know?
Exactly. But now, like, it's like, do you even surf if you don't have 20 photos of yourself getting tubed on social media? Did you even get barreled if it's not on social media? Like, there's just something awful about it. And it's all what it is essentially bragging or humble bragging and self-congratulations. And it's fucking awful, man. Like, surfing used to be about, you let your surfing do the talking, and other people will let it be known whether you rip or not. It's not up to you to decide that fact. It's not up to you to celebrate that fact. But it really bothers me the way professional surfers are using their surfing ability and their access and intel for these waves to make a living at the expense of what is a resource of the commons. Those waves do not belong to professional surfers. They belong to us, the people. Yes. And it's not up to them to exploit them for their financial gain. Like, where the fuck's my cut, cunt? Like, cough up. Like, yeah, right. I like that wave too. Like, why should you film it and make some money off getting hits on YouTube or whatever? It shits me to tears.
No, I understand. And I can really hear your passion in that. And, you know, when it comes to the visual media and all these clips that need to be done, and the hunger and desire, I mean, that you have to put these clips up constantly. Like, social media is so distracting to the truth because you have to be so on it. I hired a young lady to promote my book on Instagram. I created an Instagram and I did it. And I lasted about 3 weeks before I went to her and I just said, this is ridiculous, you know? And she goes, yeah, you got to understand that if you're going to like try to shill something, try to sell something, it's 60 hours a week, man. I mean, you're not putting any time into this at all. And I'm like, well, that's why I hired you. She goes, no, man, it takes a team. It takes filmers. It takes total commitment to this social media, or you're just going to fall by the wayside. And I learned a big lesson. I just got out. I just got out of it. My Instagram now is just a post saying, if you want to buy a really cool book, here it is. That's it. You know, and I know that that's the, you know, what they say, social suicide, but it brings up an important point, the thing you made. And that is, there's two movies I'd like to compare with you right now. Okay. Now I'm going to go way back into the past and mention Morning of the Earth. Okay. By Albie Falzon. Okay.
Of course.
Now, I believe it's a movie that, you know, every 12-year-old Australian surfer should sit down and watch. Okay. One of the most astonishing things about that movie was what it captured. It captured a truth. And what was so astonishing to me is when I walked out of the theater after seeing that, my head was spinning. And this was, I didn't realize until I was halfway home on my little bicycle that there wasn't a single word of narration in Morning of the Earth. It was a clip. It was this big, long, truthful clip. And the story was told through music and lyrics. Now, I want to compare that to another movie I just saw 2 nights ago that I really liked, but really displays the difference between capturing the truth and capturing what you can. It's a movie called Kangs, and it's just come out by Rip Curl.
Yeah, well, my co-host Vaughn made it, but yeah, I know the film.
I know
It's a
Vaughn
great
very
film.
well.
Yeah,
I know Vaughn very well, and please send him my love. Okay, so anyway, it was really well made, but the difference in it is that it's 3 entitled professional surfers brought to secret waves and filmed very simply and intersected by them, you know, buying a meat pie at the Golden Fleece. You know, like, well, where's the insight? What is the meaning of it? I'm glad that, you know, Gabriel and Mick and Mason had a good time, you know, but where is the meaning to me, for the proletariat, for the, you know, from everyone from that 12-year-old kid I'm talking about at Burley Heads to people like me, you know, in my 60s that are still passionate surfers. What do I get out of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And, you know, that's the problem with a lot of surf films, is that they're made by surf filmers, right? So they're not storytellers. They're people who sit there on the beach and shoot elite surfing. And telling a story is its own skill. It takes as long to learn how to tell a story as it does to learn how to surf. Like, it's a 10,000 hours kind of deal. It's a fucking nightmare.
Agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's a nightmare. And you know, Vaughn ultimately didn't shoot that film. He just cut it together. And you know, I'm not throwing shade at the guy who did shoot it. That's just the nature of all surf films, is that generally the people who are there to film it aren't trained journalists there to you know, unpick the story. Sometimes the surfers aren't even happy to really be
to talk to them.
Be there for interviews and stuff. Yeah,
it's the caption. I'll tell you what, I think Vaughn is one of the great thinking minds in surf, and I think he's been that way since a very young age. And so I'm not throwing shade at Vaughn's movie at all. I mean, that thing he did with the stop act, the claymation thing, that's genius. What was that called? The greatest surf movie ever made?
Yeah, very funny.
That approached genius in my opinion. And so it's this context that we're talking about. And I was sitting with Claw Warbrick just the other day, and we came up with 2 things. One, I've always believed that there should be an annual symposium of the great thinking minds. And I think it should take place at Bells Beach in their great surfing museum there. And you get a program together where in the first night, you talk about design and the future of it. And then the next one is competition. What are we doing with it? And the next one is performance. What's going on? And the next one is materials. What are we doing? You know, so we have this visionary meeting of minds. And, you know, I'm not talking about all the usual suspects. I'm talking about getting people like Vaughn, Derek Hine, Doug Warbrick, you know, Morris Cole, you know, they're just thinking, Tom Curran, get him in there for entertainment, you know, like, and get these points of view so that we can give our sport in the age of social media inundation, so that we can give our sport, our beautiful sport, context and meaning. I would like to organize. I've been trying to organize that for 20 years. Now, I just want to mention as an aside, the genius idea that Claw came up with, because we started asking each other questions. And I said, Claw, what's the problem with the tour? Just tell me the problem. He goes, it doesn't have a big wave event. And I went, bingo, you're right. I never thought about that. How would you do it? And he goes, here's how I'd do it. Okay. There would be a code red clause in everybody's contract on the tour. Okay. And it would be either be cloud break or ship sterns, he said. Okay. And there would be a code red clause where if a giant code red swell came in between these tournaments, right, you would be legally bound to go and surf in this thing. Okay. And if you didn't, you know, you'd lose those points, you know. And I just went, Claude, that is genius. Can you imagine how exciting that would be? Where these guys, all of a sudden it's 20-foot cloud break, and here's the big wave event of this, you know, of the year, right? And wow, man. I mean, if we have a wave pool contest, we've got to have the other end of the spectrum, man.
100%. We say it pretty much every episode that me and Vaughn do. The World Tour should essentially be held at least 50% in slabs. Like, that's where surfing is. You know, for a long time, surfers simply couldn't ride slabs. They were the preserve of the bodyboarder, but now board technology and ability has gotten to a point where we can very much surf slabs, and yet it's just not represented on the World Tour. There's almost none. Chopes and Pipeline.
In the box, maybe. The box and Margaret River, maybe.
Yeah, but they never run there. Like, they had the opportunity to run there on that last event there, and they just flat out didn't run on a cooking day out there, and we could not believe it. That was the one opportunity this year on tour to have a day in consequential waves, and they brushed it. It was for a rippable but somewhat fat right across the bay. And like, for me, man, I struggle to watch sports unless there's some skin in the game, unless there's some risk of injury, or like, you know, I like to see people's courage tested. And like the intersection of courage and skill, for me, is like the most compelling part of sport. All the sports I really adore have those two ingredients, except for competitive surfing. There's just very little courage required to compete at the elite level.
I think that you've settled on something very important here, and it's about the measure of a man, the measure of a woman, the character, you know, the character of these people. You know,
dare I say it, great.
Yeah, of course. But yes, I mean, you know, we deserve to see this character tested, you know, like they do in downhill skiing or you know, half pipe snowboarding, and you know, to see the measure of these people, you know, I think it's really important. And so I was really turned on by what Klaus said. I said, a code red clause, man. You know, we should all lobby for it. You know, I think it's fantastic.
That's it, mate. Dust off the placards. Let's hit the street. You and me, Matt, we'll lead the charge.
That's us, mate. Hey, come on. I marched shoulder to shoulder with Vaughn in all the poo marches. By God, we've shut that down, you know. I was proud of that, boy.
Now it's time to shut some more horse shit down, the current iteration of the World Tour.
Burn it to the ground.
Man, back to some of these iconic stories. I really want to get inside your head of what you saw when you were at Goonengerry with Cheyne Horan. He's a alumni of Scum Valley, like myself, and one of the most enigmatic, progressive, talented surfers of all time, no doubt about
Yes.
it. And as much as I love his surfing, what I also love about the guy is just how courageous he was in
Oh,
embracing
yes.
new lifestyles, new systems of operating. Obviously took the stand against apartheid. He was like this guy who was like way into like fasting and macrobiotic diets and LSD and meditation, yoga, like all of these things, like 20 years, 30 years before they really hit the mainstream.
Sure.
And he was derided for a lot of this. He was seen as a weirdo and,
Yes.
like mocked because he fucking come up short against MR like 4 times in a row. I mean, you're up against an absolute competitive Adonis, and yeah, far out, man. He went toe to toe with arguably like the second greatest male competitor of all time and lost. And board technology was in a state of flux, and I guess he backed the wrong horse there. But again, like, it was all experimenting and avant-garde. And now you got to see inside what was one of the most like controversial in ways chapters in any high profile surfer's life. You went and looked at Cheyne as he was going through this meltdown / rebirth in the hippie hills of Byron at Goonengerry. What was that like, man?
Well, I'd known Cheyne for so long, and I always I always looked at him as a ward of the Pro Tour. I never saw any guidance. He was very much alone. He was just sort of a ward to professional surfing, like an orphan to the professional surfing. Let's not forget that he was one of those hard scrabble kids you're talking about from Bondi. And let's not forget that he was the Australian champion skateboarder. And he had these incredible physical skills. And my God, the guy's massive strength that this man still has. But even back then, standing next to him was like standing next to a radiator. He radiated strength and conviction. And so when I heard that in my opinion, when I went to find in Goonengerry, I went to find Cheyne finding himself finally, because I believe he was an Australian surfer who had been told who he is. You're a talented, you got a shock of white hair, you got the white zinc on your nose, you're beautiful, you're powerful, you're an incredible competitor, a remarkable tube rider, and he invented the floater. Let's not forget that. And here was this incredible person who finally reached an adult age and just said, you know what? I'm going to go way out there and I'm going to find myself. And that's what I went to see. And that's why it was such a story of vulnerability. The courage it took for him to let me do that, because we knew each other. He knows who I am. He knows what I've done. And he said, bring it on. This is part of this experience. I want to see what an outside mind, would think of what's going on here. And that story saddened me because I was such a fan of Cheyne. And I saw him swirling around in this world of trying to find himself. And I so wished that he would. And he eventually did, of course, and we remained friends. But I told that story of a man finding himself in the middle of the swirl of it all, and this experimentation that took courage, and those surfboards, and working with Ben Lexon, and putting his money where his mouth is, and doing this. I just thought it was remarkable. And going out there and living with him for a week out there was just so moving to me. And it was, in many ways, I felt sad for him, because I wanted him to be Cheyne. I wanted him to win at all this again. I wanted him to win as he'd always done in his life, as a champion, and as that colorful person with the colorful boards. And, so it was an experience that was both, I witnessed great courage, I witnessed great vulnerability, and I walked away with sadness. And I think that is reflected in the story, because I saw a very celibate and very lonely Cheyne Horan during that week.
Yeah, and that decision to step away from competitive surfing and find himself, I mean, that kind of paved the way for Curran to do the same, Slater to
Yeah.
do the same. Like that's almost a rite of passage now in any elite competitive career, is to just step back for a bit, surf the waves you want to surf the way you want to surf. And yeah,
And surf the boards you want to surf.
exactly, because that's what it's about, right? That's why we all
Sure.
started doing this shit. It wasn't to win heats, that's for sure. And like
No,
it must fucking drain those guys at the pointy end, having to surf to these conventions in this format on these boards. Like, I can't imagine how exhausting that is for guys who ultimately became so good at this sport or pastime because they simply love the sensations of it. So to deprive yourself of all these other sensations, and that must be hard to deal with. Let alone,
well, it's interesting you raised that point. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jed. Sorry,
no,
you get me very excited. Going back to Vaughn's movie with Kangs, when you see Gabriel Medina free surfing, and you realize, well, wait a minute, he's not surfing like he's in the heat. He's surfing like he wants to catch that wave in the middle of nowhere. Wait a minute, hang on. What's he doing? I mean, you watch that movie, and Gabriel Medina is not surfing a heat. He's surfing like he's digging being out in the ocean. And I think Vaughn really captured that feeling in that movie. And it was because, Mason Ho always does that, and Mick Fanning is so remarkable that, he can walk down the beach and it's the best wave you've ever seen, but you see Gabriel Medina free surfing like he's enjoying himself, and it's shocking. And I think Vaughn really captured that.
Yeah, mate, one of the greatest things you can ever experience in life, and I've had the chance twice, is to see Medina free surf up close.
Oh, wow.
It's outrageous. It's like it's there's no words. It's in that Immanuel Kant realm of the sublime. Like, and yeah, I guess, like, he's never even put out a surf section. I can't think of one, and he's never given himself that opportunity to go searching like Tom Curran, or So I would love to see it. I don't really know what there is left for him to achieve competitively, unless he wants to try and like win fucking 12 world titles or something. Like, obviously that's unlikely, / impossible. So yeah, I do wonder what's there for him in the competitive space, and why he doesn't just get on exactly like that. Get on the search campaign with Mick and Mason. What an amazing trio. And I hope that really is where he stays. I just hope they stay the fuck out of joints like Kangs went to. Right. I'm glad you brought that kind of contradiction up, because there's a few of our fans have made the same point about, we complain about certain pro surfers going to that part of the world and not others. But I should just make the point that there is a slight nuance. Hold on. There is a slight nuance there with the way we document / film and photograph surf spots. And those nuances have to be understood. So, like, in that part of the world, the waves they shot, unknown waves. There's known waves down there. And although I'd rather not see them on film, I do know that they're on the map. They they're just fairly popular. The locals are pretty conciliatory in those spots. Sure. And then there's spots down there that aren't on the map and haven't been shot and should not be shot. But surfers have gone down there and done that. And I think, like, it's this constantly moving border where, you kind of have to know where the line is. And it's not a static line. It's moving around the place, and the goalpost shifts. So, yeah, the real core lords know where the line is in that part of the world, and they're in contact with the community there, and and making sure everything's sweet. And I could tell that Kangs was that kind of film where that there was spots that they left off and didn't go to, and that the ones that they did were known enough.
Yeah.
So that was an important point.
Well, hey, I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I know I've been agreeing with you all day long, but it's because you're raising very good points. And it's a real pleasure to talk to another thinking mind. So I thank you for that. Yeah, I've been down in I've been down in that zone of surfing. And one of my favorite stories of localism, other than, of course, the famous Moose, who used to play with his band hanging upside down in gravity boots. Okay. And I,
No way.
yeah, and I've witnessed that. Okay.
You're
So anyway,
kidding. At
one
Penong
of my
Pub. Oh
one of my
shit! I
favorite,
shouldn't have said that. Anyway.
oh shit. One of my favorite stories, I think is coming out of Marion Bay or something. But anyway, one of my favorite stories was these guys pull up, outsiders pull up, and they're all ready to go, and they're all excited. They go out and they go surfing. They come back, and the local surfers have kidnapped their girlfriends. They've kidnapped their girlfriends, and they're driving them to the South Australian border as they speak. As these guys come in, getting out of their wetsuits, hey, where's our girls? And the guy steps forward, sorry, mate. They're on their way to the South Australian border. We're going to leave them at the Golden Fleece. We hope you go pick them up. And these guys had to get in their car and go get their girlfriends. It's so funny to me. I mean, that's great. That is great locally.
At least it all ended well. At least they didn't end up decomposing in acid in a barrel locked in a bed vault at a town called Snowtown.
These guys picked them up. They picked up their girls, and actually, the rumor is that one of the girls was going to stick around with one of the locals. So
yeah,
so it all worked out.
It's possible, man. One of the things I admire about your journey is that you've traversed incredible terrain and experiences in life. And I think that's kind of the job of the journalist and the writer, is to really get out there and experience worlds far beyond surfing. I mean, fuck, like as good as it is, like there's a big wide world out there. And, that big wide world affords you perspective on surfing, which everyone needs. And you've really done this, man. Sometimes I think of you like almost like you're a character out of Apocalypse Now, but I'm not sure if it's Dennis Hopper, the journalist, or Marlon Brando's character who, goes up.
Maybe a combination of both.
Yeah, I think it is a combination of both. And just ripping through a few of the things you've done, man. I read that you did jet ski rescues in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. Can you paint the scene and explain how you ended up there?
Yeah, that's real easy. It all started with the biggest wave in the world, and that was the 2004 tsunami. I'll keep the story as short as I can. I went over there to do the story on the tsunami, of course, because it was so important to the Mentawai and that whole Indonesian zone. And I looked around and realized that the global aid world is useless and wasteful and horrible and corrupt and terrible. And all of a sudden, like some sort of angel from heaven, Bill Sharp, who was running the Billabong Odyssey at that point, he was there to cover the story too. And he found me and just goes, "Isn't this ridiculous?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "I tell you what, I'm going to go get a bunch of money from Billabong. We're going to do it ourselves." And I said, I'm in. So he got Bill Sharp, the angel, got all this money, and we rented our own charter boat. And we loaded it up with stuff that we knew people needed because we were surfers that have been in those islands, and we got out there before anybody, and we were helping people, with their villages and what they need, and rice and food. We even brought goats, that to replace their livestock. We did all this stuff, and it was very successful.
I thought you meant like Slater, Beachley.
What, Kelly and Mick? No, we didn't bring Kelly and Mick, But anyway,
you could have. They would have made a difference.
Oh, mate. So all the surfers pitched in. The Padang surfing community there, in West Sumatra, everybody jumped in. Everybody did a great job. And in many ways, it created what Surf Aid is today with what they did as well. So we were out there as these independent operators. And Bill decided, you know what? We should do this because surfers are really great with global aid. And here's why. One, they're physically fit. Two, they're courageous beyond imagination. Number three, they're culturally sensitive. They get it. And number four, the world likes surfers. The world likes surfers. You can show up in Simalu in the middle of nowhere and a bunch of surfers, get off the boat, and the villagers are going to like these guys. We're likable. Okay. So we're perfect. So anyway, it worked out. We did all this stuff. We got all this media attention because we were, the little boat that could. And then we got back to the United States, and Bill formed a nonprofit, and we were going to take a shot at being an independent nonprofit as surfers that helped after natural disasters. We thought, this is great. And let's do it. And all of a sudden, Hurricane Katrina hits. And I'm like, it is on the coast. It is a surfing town. And Bill goes, no, I got it, man. I got it. He took all the Billabong jet skis from the Odyssey and said, we're going, man. And so we hopped in these jet skis. We hopped in these cars, and we towed them all the way from California, all the way to Katrina. And when we showed up, there was such chaos there because, of course, the American government just completely dropped the ball. And we show up with these jet skis, and we're just, yep, we're here to rescue everybody. And they're like, right this way, sir. And so they let us in the inside, and there we were at Katrina. And that begins a whole nother story of how we went to the 9th Ward and, risked our lives. And
what's the 9th Ward?
The 9th Ward is basically South Central LA in New Orleans. It's the gnarliest, heaviest, most dangerous neighborhood probably in the United States of America, because it's right on the Mississippi there. So all the drugs go through there, and they got all the meth houses and all the manufacturing. And it's just this super gnarly place that is run by warlords. Wow. And that was underwater. And there were kids that were up on roofs of their schools, even after a week, living out of, there was one story of the kid that was a good swimmer, and he would swim down and get all the potato chips out of the vending machine. And, they were living on this stuff until we showed up. And I give all credit to Bill Sharp that we showed up on these jet skis, and we started rescuing these people and bringing them back to dry land. And then once again, surfers, because of our skills and because we knew jet skis and because we're great swimmers and because we're physically fit and because people like us and trust us, we all of a sudden we were recognized by the United States Army, and we're like, who are you guys? And we're like, oh, we're surf zone relief operations, mate. And they're like, oh, how much help do you need? And man, we had helicopters, and it was really exciting stuff. And we were very proud of what we did. And of course, in the end, our nonprofit did not thrive because, we just weren't fundraisers. That's what, we're not guys running around begging for money all day. Would have been nice if somebody gave us a shitload, but, we'd be in operation to this day. But that was a real exciting period in my life for sure.
Man, your career working as a relief worker is insane. I'm just looking here. You worked in Kashmir on the border of India and Pakistan, building shelters following the 2006 earthquake, 2004 tsunami, as you mentioned, up there at Aceh.
Hurricane Katrina, the Mount Merapi, there's the Mount Merapi explosion. That volcano blew up and blew its stack. We had to get people off the mountain. And even to this day, even during COVID, it's always a part of my life. I think it should be a part of every surfer's life doing this. I think when the call goes out, surfers should respond because we're so damn good at it. For example, COVID here, I joined a group of Australians, of course, called Project Nasi. And we got all the restaurants together. We got all the rice together, and we started feeding people, and of course I give all that credit to the leaders of Project Nasi. It wasn't just me, but I found myself part of it and a valuable part of it, I will say. And it felt very good. And I think that surfers as world travelers should respond to all natural disasters, particularly coastal ones. Look what Mick did, during the flood. What's he do? Goes straight down to Tweed Heads River, gets a boat, loads it up. Let's go help, yes, Mick, hell yes. He should be given a medal for that.
Well said, man. Yeah, Mick and Joel and Luke Monroe and Mikey Wright and tons of others, nameless, not famous surfers just out there in tinnies and jet skis doing their best. And it is crazy after a natural disaster. What you don't realize until you've lived through one is that there is this gnarly lag in between when the disaster happens and when government support arrives.
Oh,
It's a long period, and people need help straight away. They need to be picked up, dusted off, and put back on their feet. They need food and housing, and it's really just left up to civilians to do that for each other. It's fucking wild. Like when you talk about Kashmir, New Orleans, Arche, you know, talk us through some of the memories, the sights, the smells that have stayed with you from those places.
Well, of course, many of us have been to the Indonesian archipelago, and we know what that's like. And so I'll just tell you something that was unfamiliar in the archipelago is when we would show up, because we went to the north to Simeulue because we knew no one would ever go there. And so we pulled up on our boat, and the actual reefs were about, I would say, 3 meters out of the water because of the lift of the bottom of the ocean. And that was like some sort of science fiction vision to any surfer, you know, to see this reef that had come up out of the ocean and was drying, you know, and there was dead fish and these great coral formations just in the sun as high as the roof in your house. And you're pulling up to these things just going, what in the hell? Incredible sight like that. The other incredible sight was the daily change when we were moored at Nias. And one of the things that we vowed is that we were not going to surf until the job was done. We were not on a surf trip. And we all signed a little paper and put a little thumbprint on it in our own blood, you know. And so we were not going to surf, but we were moored at Nias, helping the Nias people on our way north. And the Nias reef, because of the aftershocks, the whole reef was like a waterbed, and it would change almost hourly. The wave itself would change. You could see it warbling, and then all of a sudden it'd be this unrideable slab. Then it would just be this closeout, and then, you know, and it was all changing during the day because the whole earth after that tsunami was like a waterbed.
Wow, you must have just been sitting there going, "Oh, please, no, no!" Oh, thank God.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to this day, the locals are really tapped into, because it still moves around. You know, that reef does change, and it does change personalities, and the locals are really into it. So that was remarkable. I also remember, of course, it was in New Orleans, and the water there was just black because, you know, the levees had broke, and the place was flooded up to a first floor level, and cars were, you know, cars were floating around, and some bodies, unfortunately. And I'll never forget the sight of Frank Quarte and Bill Sharp on the roof of a house with axes chopping a hole through the roof to get at these two old people, these two pensioners who were crying out for help in this incredible heat and the whole thing. And I was sitting there on the idling jet ski looking up at these two surfers just going, man, on you, mate. You know, like, on you, mate. You know, like, surfers to the rescue, man. You know, I'll never forget. I was so proud of those two guys because they were the real jet ski experts, not me. And then the other thing was, if I were going to say something about Kashmir, it was a remarkable moment when I would hike up with a small team. I would hike up into the higher reaches where nobody could be reached, and we would start building shelter out of their homes that had fallen on the ground. And then the next thing we would do is we would build a helicopter pad with the whole community. We get everyone together and get a helicopter pad. And I can remember after like 4 or 5 days work, and some people are sheltered, and there's a helicopter pad that's been built, and I get on my comms there, and all of a sudden I call in a helicopter. You know, and this helicopter, this UN helicopter, shows up and lands on a helicopter pad that we built, this community, and I get tears in my eyes. You know, I still do. That was really quite something.
It's amazing, man. I mean, a deep congratulations to you for having the courage to live that life, and the wisdom to know that helping others is really the most rewarding thing you can do in life.
Well, I agree. And some people also, and thank you so much for being so complimentary about my path in life and my journey. Thank you, Jed. I appreciate that. But I do want to say to everybody that is listening that it comes at great sacrifice, this kind of life. Great sacrifice. I never married until I was in my late 50s. I have never owned a home. I don't have children. I don't have, my life is still a life of wandering. I live in a little 2-bedroom house on the beach at Kuta Beach. And I still have my circle of friends and my global community. But I just want to mention to people that it's not luck. It's not luck to live a life like this. Although I would encourage anyone with the spirit to do it. It's not luck at all, and it's a life of great sacrifice.
Mate, you nailed it. And it's bizarre how similar our trajectories have been. I also grew up itinerant with a single mother, moving around. I think lived in 10 homes before I was 13.
Wow.
And my adult years have completely reflected that upbringing. Like yourself, worked as a journalist and a freelance journalist, living in Bali for years, traveling around Asia, living in so many different communities, to the point where, you end up with a global community of friends for sure, but you don't necessarily have that community on the ground in the place you're at. It's not easy to necessarily build those relationships in short amounts of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is definite downsides to living that itinerant lifestyle of the journalist, which is so poorly paid. Like, that's the other thing. People go, "Oh, cool job," and it's like, yeah, but you basically give up any opportunity of having a home or a family. And even now, where we're starting to make a little bit of money off the podcast, we've still got righteous, idealistic people telling us who we can and can't take money off. You can't take money off this corporate sponsorship or this corporate sponsorship. It's like, mate, I don't live in a reality where I can say no to money. Like, I've never had it in my life. And I'm
glad you said that. Yeah, I'm glad
I would rather the world didn't work in such a way that all the people with all the money are generally tied up in fairly nefarious industries. But that's the fucking system we live in. And if for people to say to me, no, you are not allowed to take money off those people, you're not allowed to advertise with those people, like, who are you to fucking say that, man? Are you telling me I should just live in fucking rags in a shack out the back of Cheyne's joint in Goonengerry? Like, mate, I've done that. And I'm over it.
Exactly.
Like, I need to make some loot now so I can fucking have a family and a home. Anyway, it's
no, I agree.
I didn't set it up that way, but that's a rant, man. But yeah, I get what you're saying, man. Like, mate, and again, it is a deep sacrifice. But on the flip side of that, you've compiled such an enviable catalog of memories and experiences, and they're finding their mark in this book, In Deep, and hopefully in the form of a memoir. Because I think, mate, like, if you really want to tee off and go gonzo on it, like, it'll turn Barbarian Days into toilet paper, mate.
I respect all that, and of course I respect Williams' book, and I think we need all these things. And it brings me back to this book thing. I know, like my friend Pete Matthews recently, just I think yesterday, handed this book, In Deep, to Chloe Andino, and Chloe basically said, "What is this?" And he goes, "Well, it's a book." And he goes, "Oh, I don't know if I've ever read a book in my life." Well, start here, Pete said. Start here, mate. And so what I'm trying to say is, I believe that this book is as vital to the youth as it is to, the Claw Warbricks, or the people like me in my early 60s, or people like you, and, people mid-career. I think, and I think all the world champions should read it. And I think that it reaches everybody because it is short subject magazine type stories. They don't take forever to read, and it's not daunting. And you can live with this book over a year and just thumb through it and go, "Oh, I think I'll read about Keala today, or I think I'll read about Mick today," or something like that. So I think that this book thing, when you mentioned Barbarian Days and In Deep, this book, I think that, they're still vital. Like I just got my new issue of Tracks magazine, and it's fantastic. Luke's doing such a good job with that. And I have
another one of Scum Valley's finest. Doff of the cap to Luke Kennedy.
Yeah.
He was a relief teacher at my high school when I was a teenager. He's in my board riders club. He hooked me up with my first 2-day-a-week gig in the media at Tracks Mag, or in the surf media.
Yes.
Anyway.
I tip my hat to Luke all day long. And he was nice enough to print a feature that I just wrote on the Mentawai, and it was all about the owner of the Kandui Resort, and it's a quite different story. It's not in the book; it'll be in the next one. But it was with great pride that I got this magazine and this story, and read the other stories that were in there, where surfers are still out there writing these stories, and you can still get them access to your mind without a phone. And I think that is always going to be around. I am very happy to have got this book just under the window of all the noise about ChatGPT and AI. I personally believe the people that invented ChatGPT and AI should be arrested and incarcerated for life. I think it's a crime, and I think it steals imagination. It steals the desire for research and wanting to know something. I think it's a crime. And so I'm very glad to get this book in under that, what is on the horizon apparently with ChatGPT or AI, whether or not it bites us in the ass or not.
Totally. And quick shout out to Bill Finnegan as well. He's been good to me. Tried to help me out with an article, I was sending probably ambitiously to the New Yorker, but a very decent guy. That book's a fucking absolute stonker. I've taken the piss out of it on the pod in the past, but it's quality Barbarian Days. And
I agree. Well, it won a Pulitzer Prize.
Exactly.
Jed, I mean, come on. What? Of course, of course it's great.
Yeah. Although, don't get me started on the bourgeois literary establishment and what they consider to be important. Anyway, but
us, the great proletariat, you and I, the proletariat writer, the ink-stained wretch, we're the penny a page writers.
Well, that's the thing, right? In the bourgeois literary establishment, it's just fucking silver spooners up against silver spooners. There's no grit merchants in that industry because you don't get a fucking start if you don't know the right people. And so that's like they're not actually competing against the real deal, are they? They're competing against each other. It's a bunch of fucking soft cocks having a crack. But let some battlers loose in the mix, and you might get some different Pulitzer Prize winners.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
But man, as well, gotta acknowledge the foreword to the book. It's written by Kelly fucking Slater, man. Like we talked about it at the top of the program, but it's actually, it made me think when I was reading it, someone's got to get onto Kelly and get him writing, like get him with a Substack, or, he's a verbose, deep thinker with an insane well of wisdom and experiences like yourself. And I really loved the foreword to the book because he has opinions, man. He has strong opinions. He takes a swipe at the tech world. He makes some of the same points you did about the importance of long form journalism, of books, of accruing knowledge in the correct mediums. And he also tells the funniest story about you getting pantsed at a pro junior in Ventura.
Fantastic. But I'll tell you what I'm glad you mentioned this, because Kelly Slater takes surfing seriously. He takes it seriously. He's taken his career seriously, and he didn't have a parachute early on. He didn't have a parachute at all. And this man who is highly intelligent, okay, he even created the wave pool. Let us not forget the legacy of Kelly and that crazy invention of that wave, from the desire of not having enough waves on the East Coast, the desire of every East Coaster, God, if I only had a wave pool in my backyard. And this man assembled a team that did it spectacularly. And if that isn't impressive, I don't know what. And I love the thought of Kelly Slater writing a book. Now we do have that one
The
book,
Pipe Dreams. I've read
Pipe
it,
Dreams,
and
and that, you know, it was
probably
ghost
good. Yeah.
written,
I can't remember. A
basically
long time
ghost
ago.
written, you know, right? It was
Right.
a series of
Yeah.
interviews.
I
I
mean,
get it.
contemporary hot takes on topics, on
Yeah.
whatever it is that he wants to share with us. I'd read that because he is
Oh,
a
yes.
really interesting guy.
No, I agree. And the other thing too, which is really astonishing to me, is that he can write.
Exactly.
He
Yeah.
can put pen to paper.
Can.
If you read that essay, the foreword he did for Clark Little's photography book, I was engrossed. I'm just like, did Kelly write this? You know, like what? You
This
know,
kid
he's
left
talking
school when he was 14. I thought he was illiterate.
I was like, no, I think that'd be a great idea. And again, I think you and I have got to get the placards out, and we got to start walking down the streets with a couple of our movements. And one of them is free Kelly Slater. Free Kelly Slater. Let him write. Let him say what he wants. You know, that's what I say. I think it's a great idea.
Man, speaking of the wave pool, I nearly fell off my chair when I was reading that 1989 surfer piece you wrote about him. You ask him what he wants to do if he becomes rich, and he says, "Oh, well, if I had money, I'd probably build a wave pool for me and all my friends." He said that when he was 17. He
And
fucking achieved his childhood dream, man.
And he did it.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. He did it. And you say what you will about the wave pool. I think it gets a really bad reputation because they have that ridiculous contest in it. But the wave itself, come on, man. Have you seen that thing? I mean, Jesus. Wow. This isn't some Waco shore break, air ramp. This is a man's wave, and like, wow, that was visionary, and it will be his legacy, wow. I'm actually a proponent of wave pools. I think wave pools are a really good idea for one reason. It completely removes the anxiety of being in the lineup. It completely removes all drop-ins. It completely removes all localism. It removes everything. There's plenty of waves to go around, and it's your turn.
I like that, man. I really like that. And before I let you go, I just also want to make mention of the fact that you yourself were a fairly elite surfer, a competing professional surfer, right? Back in the day.
Oh, yes, I was, and a very proud one. I'm still sponsored by Rip Curl. Rip Curl runs in my veins, man. And I'm very proud of what I did. I didn't light the tour on fire in any way. As a matter of fact, in many ways, I was a bit of a ghost. But, you try going up against, Gary Timperley and Sean Thompson and Rabbit Bartholomew. And you try going up against these guys as a little kid. I went for it, man. I was there throwing punches, and I did my best. And I think my favorite achievement was on North Stradbroke Island, okay, during a cyclone. And I won 2 Bride of the Contest. And there was some cats there, man. Specky was, Russell Speck, Gary Timperley. There was some cats, man. Dominic Wybrow, these guys. And I won the 2 Bride of the Contest, and I won a Kodak Instamatic camera for it. I was so proud. I was like, oh, mate, I won a camera.
Amazing. Straight to the Hock shop in Logan.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great achievement. But the other thing that it did was Ketut Menda, in that contest, they took 8 international surfers and put them up against 8 Australians. And we got mowed down by the Australians, of course. But the Indonesian representative was the great Ketut Menda. And Ketut Menda and I were roommates. We became roommates because we were both, sort of very independent. And as the sole American and as the sole Indonesian, we were drawn to each other, and we were roommates, and we became lifelong friends. And many, many years later, when I moved here permanently to retire 13 years ago, I was observing Purnama in the temple with my lady, and I'm showing respect with my head bowed, and we're listening to the beautiful ceremony and the whole thing. And I get a little tap on the top of my head and a whisper in my ear, and I look up, and it's Menda. Menda is actually one of the priests in training, and he went on to become, the great Ketut Menda went on to use his spirituality, and as it relates to surfing, to become, a Pemangku here, a priest. And there he was after all these years, and I was just like, Ketut, it's so good to see you, man, and it's these kind of friendships that surfing give you, and the new ones that you can make are just so important. And I will say, I just wanted to mention one more thing about Australia, if you don't mind me saying this. I think the most successful surfer in the history of surfing is the great Australian champion, Mick Fanning. What a career and what a man after what he has come through. I had an experience with him recently here that really convinced me that he is the greatest champion that we've ever had because of who he is. We recently lost McCullough Jones here. He was a real son of Bali, and we lost him, and we were all at the crematorium and the ceremony here in Bali. And I look over to my right, and very quietly sitting in the back pew was Mick Fanning. Mick Fanning was a friend of McCullough, and he flew into Bali for this ceremony, this final ceremony of the cremation. And he very quietly sat in the back between two old Indonesian women who didn't know who he was. He wasn't drawing attention to himself. When Love Hotel got everyone to please talk, you can step forward, he didn't. He wasn't going to make the day about Mick Fanning. He wasn't going to speak. He was just there to show his respect for his friend. And I had tears in my eyes. I just thought, this guy is class, man. This is a class act that I'm looking at. And he very quietly shook some hands and went on his way. And it just left me with the impression that from the background that he came from and the incredible skill that he has, the injuries that he's come back from, and to become a wealthy Gold Coast resident and such a remarkable surfer when you see him in this Kangs thing. My call is that Mick Fanning is the greatest champion we've ever had.
Oh, it's a big call. And as much as I love Mick, I'm not willing to go there with you, but I respect the fuck out of that guy. And yeah, he is the battler king, the battler prince, son of a single mum from fucking Penrith who became a world surfing champion. Are you kidding me?
From Penrith.
It's unbelievable. It's biblical. It's it's less believable than the Bible. But
well, anyway, that's my big call.
I love it. No, it's great. I mean, frick, man. There's many people who would agree with you. Like, in light of actually reading your Surfer Magazine piece about Slater, I'm more in Kelly's camp after understanding in rich detail the hardship he faced as a Grom growing up. So yeah, I mean, take your pick from any of those guys. That they're all fucking battlers done good. John, Medina, Fanning, Slater, Beachley, like it's a battler-a-thon, and credit to them all. And man,
certainly Lane Beachley, certainly. And I was also a great proponent of female surfing all my life, because in my experience with these surfers doing these stories, I've found all the women very powerful, and I found all the men very vulnerable.
Interesting. Yeah, and I guess there is some strength in vulnerability, or courage in vulnerability. But yeah, man, I agree. I have so much respect for the women pro surfers, particularly of that era, like the 80s, 90s, Jodie Cooper, Pauline Mensah, Beachley, Burridge, like frick, man. Frida Zamba, like you talk about hard Scrabble battlers who are up against it. In surfing's history, no one has had to, break the ceiling more than that generation of female surfers. Incredible. And yourself, man, you mentioned you come out swinging, you come out throwing punches. I can't let you go. I know you got to go, but I can't let you go before you tell me about this dalliance you had with the Golden Gloves. So you're a mad pugilist. You're a proper Hemingway prototype.
Listen, I would show up for my daily beating. Okay. I mean, I was just Irish, I mean, I would just go in, I had some skills. I had great surfing fitness, and I really loved the workouts because it was so great for surfing. And I loved the mythology of boxing. And I really wanted to do my part and be part of it for a couple of years. Now, I never won any great championships. I was involved in some 3-round smokers. But I wanted to know what that was like. And a lot of it was because I've never lit my surfing world on fire in big waves. I've always been very hesitant and anxiety ridden in big waves, and it's always troubled me. And I wanted to really test my courage, and I thought the best way to test my courage is to go get punched in the face. And so I took up boxing in San Francisco and did it for a couple of years and was in tremendous shape. But like I said, once again, it was sort of like my surfing career. I was right there in the middle, and I got in the ring, you know, and I threw my punches, but I'm not going to say that I lit anything on fire or won any titles or anything like that. But yeah, I was involved in the Golden Gloves, and I look back on that as a remarkable experience. And to this day, I'm still a boxing fan. I'm not much of an MMA fan, I must say. I'm old school, I guess. I like the idea of guys trading punches. You know, I know it's brutal, I know it's horrible, but you know, I can't help it. I love the mythology, and I'm very proud to be part of it, even though, like I said, I showed up for my daily beating. You know, that day, I know you've been a martial artist. You know, that day when you show up and you realize you're facing someone who is so far superior to your skill that you just go, oh my God. And you just take your beating and go, I think I've had enough of this sport. You know, I think I've had enough. That day came to me.
It's every day at jiu-jitsu. I'm headed there in a couple hours. I've got ulcers on my neck from getting choked out that often. And I'm new to martial arts, to be honest. I learned to fucking defend myself at a certain age, but there wasn't much guidance or art to the style of fighting I was forced to learn.
Yes.
But yeah, fuck, man, incredible life. Love the variation of experiences and the commitment to being a real seeker, an adventurer, and really experimenting as much of the human experience as you can. I think that is the job of the journalist. And, you know, we're just essentially, our job is to be conduits of everything that we learn and try to disseminate that to people who haven't been as fortunate to have those experiences, in the hope of, you know, enlarging or improving awareness, consciousness, knowledge, information. It's an important job. It's not to be taken lightly, and you've sacrificed your life at the altar of it. So, you know, I hope people understand that and respect that.
Well, the human experience, yes. And like, I didn't choose journalism. It certainly chose me. And so in closing here, I know I would just like to say thank you to to Australia. Australia was in this journey was a big influence on my life, and certainly on my surfing, and it still remains that way. And I just want to thank, I don't know how to thank a country, but I'd like to thank you, Australia.
Thank you, Matt, and it's an absolute pleasure, man. I'd love to have you on again. I'm no doubt there's so many more things to talk about. And yeah, just good to get your take on current affairs and whatnot. So let's do it again.
Sure. Next time, let's talk about what's going on now. For now, I hope everybody, you can get the easiest way to get my book is on Amazon, I guess.
Yeah.
It's called In Deep, and it's worth it just to read Kelly's foreword, really.
So good. So good. Thanks
all
so
right,
much,
brother.
mate.
Say hi to all my Australian brothers, and particularly to Vaughn. I've got a real soft spot in my heart for him.
100%. Will do, brother.
All right, mate. Take care.
Take care, man.